The stage is set. The velvet mirage shimmered like a jewel in the city's underbelly, its neon sign casting a crimson glow over the cracked pavement outside. Inside, the air thrummed with bass-heavy music, the kind that vibrated through your bones, while the scent of perfume and spilled liquor clung to every surface. It was 1 a.m. on a Saturday, the hour when the crowd thinned but the energy held, a liminal space between chaos and quiet. Lila moved through it all with the grace of a panther, her sequined heels clicking against the polished stage as she finished her last set. At 28, she'd been dancing for 5 years, long enough to know every angle of the game, every trick of the light that turned a glance into $1. Her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp, hazel, unyielding, scanned the room as she spun around the pole, her body a symphony of control and defiance. She wasn't here for the applause, she was here for the cash, stacking it night after night toward a dream she barely spoke of, an art studio of her own, a life beyond the glitter and grind. Across the room, Marcus sat alone at a corner table, the ice in his whiskey long melted. At 35, he was a mid-level manager at some faceless corporation, a man who'd spent the week drowning in spreadsheets and petty office politics. Tonight, he'd come with colleagues, rowdy sales guys who'd already stumbled out to chase the next bar, but he'd stayed, nursing his drink and a vague ache he couldn't name. He wasn't a regular at places like this. The Velvet Mirage felt like a foreign country, its customs both alluring and intimidating. But there was something about Lila's performance, her confidence, her distance, that hooked him. He watched her finish, her final spin drawing a smattering of hoots and bills tossed onto the stage, and he made up his mind. He raised a hand, catching her eye as she stepped down, and pointed toward the private booths lining the back wall. A dance. A chance to feel something other than the weight of his week. Lila saw him the moment he signaled. He wasn't like the usual crowd, too stiff in his button-down shirt, too hesitant in his posture. A newbie, maybe, or just out of his depth. She liked that. It meant he'd either overpay out of nerves or try to haggle out of pride. Either way, she'd win. She smoothed her outfit, a black bikini top studded with rhinestones, a matching skirt that barely covered anything, and crossed the room, her stride deliberate. The club's amber lights painted her skin in warm tones, and she felt the eyes of other patrons tracking her, but her focus was on Marcus now. He'd be her last mark of the night, and she intended to make it count. The approach. "You're the quiet one," Lila said as she slid into the booth across from him, her voice low but cutting through the music. Up close, Marcus looked older than she'd guessed, lines around his eyes, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw, but there was a spark in his gaze, a mix of curiosity and calculation. He smelled faintly of cologne, something expensive but understated, and his glass was nearly empty. "What's it gonna be?" Marcus leaned back, trying to match her ease. "A dance," he said, his voice steady despite the slight catch in his throat. "Private." "What's that run?" $2.50 for 15 minutes, she replied, resting an elbow on the table, her nails tapping a slow rhythm. "Standard rate." "Worth it, trust me." He raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. $2.50. Steep for a Saturday. How about $1.75? "I've had a hell of a week, cut me a break." Lila's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just enough to let him know she'd heard this before. "Hell of a week?" she echoed, leaning forward slightly, her tone teasing but edged. "Sweetheart, I've been on my feet in 6-inch heels since 8. $2.50's the break. You want a deal, try the bar's happy hour. It's over, but the whiskey's cheaper." Marcus chuckled, the sound more genuine than he'd expected. She was quick, sharper than the girls who'd flitted by earlier with their rehearsed giggles. He liked that, even if it made his plan harder. "Fair point," he said, swirling the last of his drink. "But I'm not just any customer. I could be a regular. $1.80, and I'll be back next weekend." Loyalty's gotta count for something. Loyalty's earned, not promised, she shot back, arching a brow. $2.50, and I'll throw in some conversation, better than that overpriced ice water you're nursing. He paused, caught off guard by the offer. Conversation wasn't what he'd come for, but the way she said it, cool, confident, like she was daring him, shifted something in him. $1.90, he countered, leaning in now, his voice dropping. And you tell me something real. Not the stage act. Lila studied him for a beat, her fingers stilling on the table. He wasn't begging, wasn't whining, just pushing, testing her limits. She'd seen it 100 times, men who thought charm or sob stories could bend her rules. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the bravado, that made her pause. Not enough to cave, though. $2.50, she said, her voice firm as steel. You get the dance and a story. My terms. Take it or leave it, I've got a line forming. The bargaining heats up. Marcus hesitated, his grin fading into something closer to a grimace. He didn't like losing, not at work, not here. But she wasn't bluffing, he could feel it. The booth felt smaller now, the air thicker with the weight of their standoff. 200, he said finally, digging in. That's my ceiling. You're good, I'll give you that, but I'm not a sucker. Lila laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the bass line. 200's a floor, not a ceiling, she said, crossing her arms. And you're not a sucker, you're just new at this. 250, or I walk. Clock's ticking. He stared at her, frustration bubbling up. He'd negotiated contracts worth thousands, stared down boardroom sharks, and here he was, getting schooled by a woman in sequins. It stung, but it also intrigued him. You're tough, he said, almost to himself. Fine, 220. And you sit with me after. One drink. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment, he thought he'd crossed a line. I don't drink with customers, she said, her tone icing over. 250, dance only. Last offer before I call it a night. The words hung there, heavy and final. Marcus felt the shift, she wasn't playing anymore. He could walk away, save face, but the thought of her leaving the booth, of the night ending on her terms alone, gnawed at him. All right, he said, exhaling hard. 250. You win. Lila's smile returned, slow and victorious. Smart choice, she said, standing. Buckle up, regular. The dance and the deal. She led him to a smaller booth, curtains drawn for privacy, and gestured for him to sit. The music shifted, a slower, sultry track, and she began to move, her body weaving a story of its own. Marcus watched, mesmerized, but it was her voice that pulled him in deeper. You wanted something real, she said, her tone softer now, almost conspiratorial. Here's a story. Today, I spent my break sketching in the alley out back. A bird, a scrappy little sparrow, landed on a dumpster, and I drew it. Took me 20 minutes, and it's the best thing I've done all week. That's me, off this stage. He blinked, caught off guard by the image. You're an artist? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Trying to be, she said, her hips swaying as she circled him. This gig's just the funding. What about you? What's your hell of a week? Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. Lost a deal at work. Girlfriend dumped me over text. Same old bullshit. Just wanted to feel. I don't know, in control tonight. Lila paused mid-step, her gaze locking with his. Control's overrated, she said quietly. You're here, I'm here. That's enough. The dance ended, the music fading, and Marcus pulled out his wallet. He handed her 3 crisp hundreds. Keep it, he said, standing. You're worth it. The aftermath. Backstage, Lila counted the bills, her fingers lingering on the extra 50. She thought of the sparrow, of the sketch waiting in her locker, and felt a flicker of something, pride, maybe, or hope. Outside, Marcus stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the week lighter somehow. He wouldn't be back next weekend, he knew that, but he'd carry the memory of her, the dancer who'd outplayed him and left him better for it.